Welcome to Unit 1, and our first section in Unit 1 is Early Exploration and Imperialism in the New World. Like the standard suggests, what we're going to be looking at in these first sections of notes is imperialism. Remember, the imperialism is when a country extends its power over another country, either by military, finances, or diplomacy. And so in these first parts, while we're not talking about the United States yet because it doesn't exist, we are talking about countries that were imperialistic to the earliest indigenous people to the United States. Meaning, we're going to be talking about the Native Americans and how the earliest Spanish and Portuguese were imperialistic to them, to African Americans, and how they established a colony or colonies here in the New World. So we're going to want to be looking at that very specifically. Our objectives for this unit and our focus question really is, how has imperialism impacted the United States with its development of foreign policy? Remember, everything we're learning, we're trying to ask ourselves, how does this impact the United States? How does this impact our way of looking at the world, our way of interacting with other countries? And so while we're not talking about the United States directly, we're talking about Spain and Portugal. We are trying to understand more about what these countries, how they shaped us as Americans and how we now are shaping other countries. Our first objective for this then is, what countries were the earliest imperialists? So we're wanting to know some of the very earliest countries that were imperialistic. Now, imperialism really has probably been going on since the very beginning. So in a way, we're kind of being false here in that really imperialism has been around forever. But we're talking about mostly in our Western hemisphere and our more modern history in that context. So we'll be answering that. Objective 2, what make countries seek other nations? So why do countries become imperialistic? What's the purpose in that? Seems like something that is, why not just keep to yourself and just stay by yourselves? Why meddle in other countries' affairs or with other people's countries at all? So what makes them, what's their motivation? And then objective 3, what were the positives and the negatives of the Columbian Exchange? So while oftentimes I would say imperialism in the short term is negative, and definitely can even be in the very long run as well, there are some benefits, especially over longer periods of time, that we will want to look at as well. And so specifically in this, what are some of the positives and negatives of the Columbian Exchange? Make sure that you are answering. I'll do my best to make sure that these are clearly answered throughout the notes. So this is a map that would have been known during Christopher Columbus's time. And take a look here for a second. What are some things that we can conclude about Europe and Spain and Italy and Portugal and these other countries? What's some things we can conclude? We can see that the world at this time period, maybe you can't tell, I don't know, but let's try to identify some countries here. Can you tell what this country is? And maybe you can even read it right there. It's Africa, right? It even says Ethiopia down here. And this would then be, going up into Africa, and then this would be the Strait of Gibraltar, which would then go into Spain. So this would be modern day Spain. So that means Portugal would be right here, going into then France, and then Germany, and then Italy would be down here where Christopher Columbus was from, and this would be England up here. And you can see that really it tells us how fragile our understanding of geography was at this time period. It was very limited, very, very limited to Europe and to Asia and Africa. The Americas was not discovered yet, and it was there was no idea of even that side of the world, really. And so Christopher Columbus and all sorts of other explorers at this time, what is their motivation? They want to find an all-water route to Asia, to China, to India, right? Because China and India have spices. They have tradable goods that are now Europeans are loving. But the problem is that they've had to rely on, like Marco Polo, somebody that Christopher Columbus would have learned about when he was a child. And these men are traveling through the desert to come over here, and it's incredibly dangerous. Robbers, fighting, violence, death, not to mention just the natural risk and violence of just the weather itself, the unbearable heat, the terrible, terrible weather changing all the time. And Christopher Columbus and many others are hoping that they can find a way to get over here without using land. Some will try to go around Africa to do that. Others will think that they can go, and this will be Christopher Columbus's point, that they can go west and then will be east. It just depends. And this is kind of helping us understand this time period. Christopher Columbus would have been an expert in sailing, in all the modern technology of the time period. And these sailors were incredibly intelligent, and they were very, very astute in understanding the sea, the winds, the stars, and navigating from one place to another. So when we talk about the earliest imperialistic countries, in our case at least, we're talking mostly about Portugal and Spain. And so that's going to be part of the answer to objective one. And again, imperialism is the policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. And I added finances because today, financially, a lot of countries, we don't maybe use military, but we use our money to push around countries. So make sure you add that. So it should be a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy, finances, or military force. Okay? Now, mercantilism is a type of imperialism. Mercantilism, and tell me how these pictures might fit to our definition of mercantilism. Mercantilism is the belief in the benefits of profitable trading commercialism on behalf of your country. So the idea is, here's the mother country. Pretend that for a second that this is England here. England is the mother country. It goes out to countries like America, to Ireland, to India, and it takes the things that it needs. It takes gold and silver, it takes food, it takes the raw materials to benefit the mother country. This is mercantilism. This is its benefit is to help the mother country over that. And this other picture is kind of demonstrating how some of the rich big countries are living really well and high, while all the smaller countries are struggling to keep this boat afloat. And there is a big push today even that countries like the United States are surviving and thriving off of taking advantage of other smaller, weaker countries. And this creates some bad images towards us. This explains sometimes the anger that India can have, or China can have, or Iran or North Korea, that they can have towards the United States, and they're feeling that we are taking advantage of them. Whether that's true or not is a totally different matter, but that's how some people feel. So here are some of the technologies that Columbus would have been very up to date with. Some of them coming after him, but many of them being around while he was around. He would have been able to see some of the best maps of the time period, and because of him, better and more thorough maps will be developed. The sextant, to be able to measure things in distance and how far away they were. The mariner's compass, to allow them to know where they're going at all points of times, which direction is north, south, east, and west. All of these different things are going to be incredibly important for these men on the sea. Now, if you're somebody like Christopher Columbus and you want to have a hope of becoming a great sailor for a country or having great fame as an explorer, the thing that you'd want to do is you'd want to go to Prince Henry the Navigator School, and you should write this down. Prince Henry the Navigator, he established a school in 1419 to take basically people like Christopher Columbus and to educate them and make them to make them incredibly reliable when it came to the sea. In fact, if you go to Lisbon, you can still go to the old Prince Henry the Navigator School, which is now a museum, and you can see a lot of the instruments we just talked about. You can see some statues of some very famous sailors that went to that school, and you can see why it was so important for these sailors to go to a school to become educated this way. Now, the Portuguese are themselves, we're going to get to a lot, most of this is going to take place with Spain. We're going to talk about Spain the most, and the reason being is that Spain actually comes over to the New World. Portugal is not going to come over to the New World. They don't really have much of an interest. I mean, they will come over to the New World, but not like the Spanish will, or the English, or the French. And definitely not into North America And so we don't see as much influence from them as, say, Brazil does. But Portugal is going to have its own explorers and its own quests. And so we want to talk a little bit about these things. Portugal was exploring really Africa, especially the western part of Africa. And they dared not go in too deep into the African continent because you oftentimes would get sick and die from meeting people that had different immune systems than you. Also, it was incredibly scary because Africa has tribes everywhere, and they're all fighting one another, killing one another. And so the Portuguese are really going to take advantage of this by hiring certain tribes in Africa to go and get other tribes and enslave them for the Portuguese. The Spanish will do the same thing, and England and the United States will all be the beneficiaries of this system. Now, this I thought was such an interesting point. Historians, when asked, and I think it's important to distinguish that these are global historians that said this, but when asked, what are the two most important events ever in human history? There's a lot of things that could be said. And interestingly enough, these two historians, or not these two, I'm sorry, the vast majority of these historians said these were the two most important. So what do you consider to be the most important events ever in history? I don't know if this would be it, but I can understand their argument. So here's the first one. Number one, Bartholomew Diaz in 1487 was the first mariner to go around Africa. That seems very specific and seems like how on earth could that be the most important thing? But let's come back to that in a second. The second is Vasco da Gama, who in 1488 was the first one to find a water route to India. So number one here, Bartholomew Diaz. This is tremendous because it really opens up the rest of the southeastern part of the world. It demonstrates how people can get over to India and over to Asia quickly through a vessel, and how they're able to get there in a very quick way. And so it really links Europe and Asia in a very, very quick way. It makes it so they can really, really be connected. The second thing is Vasco da Gama going from the all-water route to India helps us understand the size of the world, helps us understand how interconnected the Americas with the rest of the Eastern Asian area are. And so these two events, historians say, are probably the most important because it really, what it does in the end is really making this world a much smaller place. Now, I think we could totally argue and ask, and I think like maybe Gutenberg's press, probably one of the most important things ever. But I definitely understand what they're saying and coming with in these two specific events. Now, Christopher Columbus was an Italian. He's not Spanish, right? He's from Italy. And he wanted to find a water route to China, just like a lot of explorers did. The problem is that a lot of people don't trust his belief. He's not necessarily the trusted sailor that we think of him today. And so a lot of people they're very hesitant to believe him. But eventually he's going to work himself up to Queen Isabel in Spain, and he's going to convince her to fund an exploration. And it tells you really, truthfully, how much little trust they had in him, because they don't give him a lot. I mean, they give him 3 ships and they give him the supplies that he needs. But really, this is a pretty small little group that's going, and it shows that even the Queen of Spain really didn't know if Christopher Columbus really was going to amount to anything. Now, it's a huge risk for the Queen, right? She's got to supply all the supplies, the ships themselves, the men, the crew, everything. It's a big economic risk. But she does supply them, and she does go, and really, truthfully, it pays off very well for Spain, doesn't it? And so they'll send out they'll send out Columbus with the 3 ships, and they will go, and Columbus will set sail to find India and China. Now, one thing that's really important is that Columbus has no idea what he finds at first. You can see in his original travels, he comes over here and he gets near to Cuba, and he comes over to Hispaniola, and he is considering this actually to be um, totally on the eastern side. He does not know he has found two new islands or that he's even near North America at all. He has no idea about this, and he'll head home thinking that he has finally found a all-water route to Asia. And this is why he calls these people Indians, is because he thinks that he has reached India, right? And that's why we erroneously have called the indigenous people of North America Indians forever, is because he thinks that they are in India, when in fact they are not. Christopher Columbus, you may not realize, goes on 3 other voyages, and his 3 other voyages, well, he'll come back, he'll explore more of Cuba and Hispaniola, he'll then come back and he'll be more towards the northern part of South America, and his final voyage is going to really be centralized in Central America, kind of near Panama and Colombia, and up here more north into like Guatemala and everywhere like that. Now, he's not the only person. I want to show you guys this map just so you can understand the sheer amount of people traveling at this time period. And some of these are really important for you guys to understand. Remember, Vasco da Gama is the one that goes, he's this one right here. It looks like it's H, right? Oh, I'm sorry, that's Magellan. Magellan is the one that goes all the way around the world for the first time and then back. Okay? But you can see, here's da Gama, which is C. Vasco da Gama is going to be the first one to get all the way there. And Diaz, which is B here, is the first one to get actually around the Cape. So these two men, those are those two very important moments. And I think they actually are even in your vocab, so make sure you've answered those clearly. Now, with all this happening in the world, the two big powerhouses that sometimes we forget is Spain and Portugal. They are competing, they are fighting for power, and they have some things in common, but they're also kind of enemies. They are both Catholic, but they both are trying to seek new riches, new things. They are becoming mercantilistic. They're wanting to find new places that they can take raw materials from to boost up their economies. Now, because there's so much fighting, it's going to actually bring in the church, the Catholic Church, to try to help persuade these two countries to quit fighting as much as they are. And so in 1494, there is the Treaty of Tordesillas. Okay? Now, Treaty of Tordesillas draws a line, and it says, okay, anything east of this line is going to be Portugal. Anything west of the line is going to be Spain. So Spain is going to have access to Mexico, to North America, to Central America, for most of South America, while Portugal is going to have most of the control over Africa and into this area today we know as of Brazil in South America. And this is why today, and I know these names are switched backwards here. I don't know. I need to get a better picture evidently, but I need you to understand just this, that the Pope writes this line. He says this line of longitude is going to be here. Spain gets anything this way and Portugal gets anything this way. And this is why you're going to see that most of Central America and huge chunks of South America all speak Spanish. The only place that doesn't speak really Spanish, and I shouldn't say only Spanish, is Brazil, which speaks Portuguese. And that's because they're the ones that get that area. And then also Portugal gets a monopoly on the slave trade and gets to control Africa. Now, remember, I was just telling you guys, Ferdinand Magellan, at the same time that all of this is going on, he becomes the first one ever to sail around the entire world. I would not have loved to have been on his ship at this time. He sails off. You can see here he leaves from Spain. He goes all the way down South America past Brazil, going down through in between Chile and Antarctica, then coming clear across. This would have been one of the most scary parts of the journey. I would think this is up into the Philippines and into Papua New Guinea and all those other islands right there in the Pacific. He's going to be now passing India, coming clear around Africa and back. It's an incredibly long journey, and they're very lucky that they even made it, because there was many times that they should have died. Now, what is fueling a lot of the Spanish? Well, it is gold. you can't overestimate that they're looking for gold, for silver, for other riches like that. And there starts to come these rumors of a city called El Dorado. El Dorado is a city that is paved in gold. They say the streets are made of gold, and it's somewhere in the Americas. And so they're going to be really looking all over North America, and you can see all of the Spanish coming here looking for these different this city of gold, and they're going to find a lot. They're going to find gold in Florida. They're going to find a lot of sugar in Cuba and Hispaniola. That's really what the slave trade is going to be a huge part of right there. They are going to go into Mexico. Of course, there's Cortez, goes to Mexico City, takes over the Aztecs, and takes all of their gold and silver. We get Pizarro, who goes into South America, and he takes all of their gold and silver. So this is a time period of great conquering. And this is important because Cortez and Pizarro are not the same as Columbus. Columbus is an explorer. His whole job is to go find new things, to go find ways to get to places. Cortez and Pizarro are not explorers. They are what we call a conquistador. They are conquerors. They are supposed to go in after the explorer and take things from the people. Okay? So we'll look a little bit more at that here. Like I said, a conquistador then is a conqueror, especially the Spanish. They were conquerors, and they conquered all over. And probably the best example is Mexico and the Aztecs. You'll remember that Fernando Cortez goes to Mexico, and as he's going into Mexico, he keeps hearing from smaller tribes about this one major tribe called the Aztecs, and how powerful they are, and how they do horrible things. The Aztecs are stealing other tribes' children and making them slaves. They're doing human sacrifices with people from other tribes, and they're doing all sorts of things. And Cortez, basically, he has about 200 men, takes other tribes, and he goes to the Aztecs. And the Aztecs really don't know what to make of them. They don't know if they're enemies, if they're friends. They are very worried about them, and they want them really just to go away. But Cortez is looking for El Dorado. He's looking for gold. He's looking for riches. And so he will go as the guise of, we just want to be peaceful and come, and then he'll start fighting. And the question is how on earth could somebody like Cortez beat somebody like Montezuma, who had significantly more men than Cortez? And a lot of it comes down from the accounts that we read from the journals of Cortez's men, as well as some of the oral histories that we learn from the Aztecs. Imagine if you are a Aztec and you are the most powerful tribe, and then comes these new people, and they wear these shiny armor, and they have these sticks that blow huge sharp things at you that will kill you. That is going to be scary. And so a lot of people have argued that really Cortez wins because not so much of his power, but because of the psychological warfare that it had on the Native Americans. They had no idea what to make of. They had never seen anything like a gun. And so the fact that somebody can point a stick at another person and shoot them is absolutely, it just blows their mind away. And so it's very, very scary. So they're going to start fighting, and then they're eventually going to take Montezuma. And here you can see Montezuma being chained and being kept prisoner. And the exchange, I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like 2 rooms full of gold and 1 room full of silver, and then they'll give Montezuma back. The Aztecs are going to do this, but instead of the Spanish living up to what they said, they will kill Montezuma, and then they will burn Tenochtitlan, the Mexico City, or the city of the Aztecs. They will burn it to the ground, and we'll just do a mass execution of the people and exodus of the city. And again, they're not so concerned about taking the people over. They want to take their stuff and then leave. That's what they want to do. This is mercantilism, a type of imperialism. We also have the example of Pizarro with the Incas. It's going to be a very similar situation. They're going to take people hostage. They're going to come in. And again, significantly less men are able to defeat a much larger power because of that. Now, I don't want to dwell on these conquistadors too long because although they are important, they're just literally, we should look at them as tools for their empire. But one thing that's going to come from Columbus and from these conquerors is as they are setting up kind of forts or places that they can stay while they're in the the new world, is they're going to want to exchange goods. They find a lot of Native Americans that have a lot of interesting things, a lot of things they really like, and they also have things that they want brought from the old world to the new world. And so here we can see the Columbian Exchange. Um, it's going to have this transfer of all sorts of things, from plants and animals to just even human people themselves, technologies and ideas, to even diseases and sicknesses. And so let's look at a couple of these things. So what came from the new world over to the old world? Things like squash and turkey, pumpkins, pineapples, peppers, tomatoes, corn. These are all things that were natural from North America that went over to Europe. Now, what do we get here today because of the old world? Well, we got things like the banana, grapes, a lot of citrus fruits, peaches, pears, turnips, coffee beans, all sorts of things like that, um, including livestock, cows, horses, pigs, all sorts of different things like that. But also, there's going to, and this is really going to be responsible for the death of what most Native Americans die of. I think they say like something between like 95 to 98% of all Native Americans die, and it's not even from sword, it's not from guns, it's not fighting, it's diseases. So they're going to get things like smallpox, influenza, like the flu, measles, whooping cough. All these things are going to come from Europe, from Africa, over to the New World. And so there are positives and negatives in this that come from those different things. So here's another look, just again. So we get, like I said, pumpkins, tobacco is huge. Tobacco is a huge thing in Europe. It had been growing here in the Americas. The Native Americans smoked tobacco amongst other things, and in Europe it becomes incredibly fashionable. In fact, a king, he hates it. I can't remember what king it is. It's a king of England. He absolutely hates tobacco and he will not smoke it. But like basically, he's the only one who won't smoke it because everyone else in England is smoking like chimneys. So one thing that I really think is important to establish here is the cycle of conquest and colonization. Number one, you send out explorers like Christopher Columbus. They go, they find new things, they tell you what there is there. They tell you they're really more on just a mission to see what's there. After that, you send the conquistadors. They are the conquerors. They go, they take over things, they steal things, they conquer people. Then after that, after you've conquered a group of people, you send missionaries over, people to convert people to Christianity. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of, if you look to this day in Central and South America, what is the main religion? It's Catholicism. Why? Because at the very beginning, when the Spanish and the Portuguese, who were Catholic, were conquering these places over, they were also sending missionaries and converting lots and lots of people at the time. The missionaries, they established Christianity, a more peaceful civilization. So then you send over actual settlers, people who will live there their whole lives. And you officially have a European colony. Now, Spain and Portugal, remember this, Spain and Portugal don't care near as much about colonies as England and France are going to. So in Spain and Portugal's case, they send the explorer, they send the conquistador, they send the missionary, but oftentimes they don't send permanent settlers. Now they do at times. One of the oldest cities in the United States, if I don't, I think it's actually the oldest city in the United States, is St. Augustine in Florida, established by the Spanish. So it does happen, but not like it does with the English and the French. Because of this, the slave trade is going to be absolutely a new industry, and it's going to be huge. It's important to realize that the original slave trade, it really had less to do with race, guys. We look at slavery and we say people did what they did because they felt like black people were inferior to them. That's really not the case. Really, the case is people were taking Africans because they could take, and it was, it's important to realize that the Europeans came over here and they tried to enslave Native Americans. The problem is that you're enslaving people who know the land, who know the area, who, they are incredibly resilient. They do not want to be conquered, and neither does anybody. Africans didn't want to be conquered either. The difference is that if you take people from their natural home and then take them thousands of miles away, what are they going to do? So they somehow break away. What do they do then? They don't know where to go. They have nowhere to be, right? And so this is one of the problems with slavery, and why Africa was such a big part of it, is they could literally take people from their homelands and they could take them thousands of miles away. And it's absolutely disgusting system that people were doing. But you will notice that race really had little to do with it. Spanish and Portuguese people would have enslaved anybody, and they did. Irishmen were enslaved. Other Europeans were enslaved. My point here is just that I want to make sure you understand that really the idea of race is a man-made thing. The idea that conquering people based on their skin color and them being less significant or less intelligent than you is completely a man-made thing, and which makes it even more disgusting. And so they're going to justify their behavior. And that's when you're going to start seeing the racial things, is when people say, how can you do this to another human being? How can you literally take human beings, treat them like cattle, even worse sometimes than cattle, beating, working them 18 hours a day, separating their families, forced breeding, selling their children, selling their spouses, and to the point of working them literally to death? How can you do this? And eventually people are going to have to say, well, how can we do this? And they're going to start to justify what they're doing through racial. They're going to say, well, it's because they are black and they're less intelligent and they don't know. And as a white person, it's my job to take care of them. This is what we call the white man's burden. And it's going to be this disgusting thing that's going to spread. And that I think people, honestly, I think people always knew was wrong. But when everybody in your culture is doing something, this is why it's so important to stand up for what's right. Because when everybody is doing something that's wrong, it's a lot easier to turn the cheek or to ignore it, right? To forget what you're doing is wrong. And so that's what they're going to do, is they're going to take all these people from these African areas and they're going to send them over here. And you can see the vast majority are going to go to the West Indies. 35% will go to Brazil. That's why there's a huge African American population in Brazil. 60%, the vast majority, will go to places like Cuba, to Hispaniola, for the sugar cane, to help produce sugar. And 5% will go to the Americas. Now these numbers will change. This is just originally, but they're going to do this, and it's a horrible thing. And so I want to talk a little bit more about slave trade. This is one of those disgusting things that was fueled by imperialism. How do you conquer? How do you take advantage of the resources of an area? Well, it's very hard to do if you're going to make just normal people do it. So what do? You enslave people. You do forced labor. So number one, too, in Africa, slavery had already existed. Africans have been enslaving each other for quite some time. Muslims had been doing it to people when they had gone into Africa, and tribes had been doing it to each other. And that's why in Africa you have tribes that are still at fighting with one another and still killing one another, because the hatred between the tribes, because of past historical events, is so tremendous that people still try to kill, hurt, or enslave other people. So the Europeans come to Africa and they see this going on and they want to take advantage of it too. And so they hire some of the bigger tribal families to go and get other families and to sell them to them so they can take them to the New World and have free labor. The Portuguese are going to replace the European slaves with the African slaves. Again, I told you, Portugal, Spain, they were fine enslaving other people. It wasn't about black and white. It was just, how do I get free labor? Africa just presented a unique opportunity because they could do it. Africans could work and could harvest sugarcane and work at the sugar plantations, like I said, in the islands of like Cuba and Hispaniola, to take advantage of those things. The first boatload of African slaves landed and was brought by the Spanish in 1518. And since then, millions upon millions upon millions of slaves were brought over. 275,000 enslaved Africans were exported to other countries. So even early on, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Between the 16th and the 19th century, so we're talking about 1500 through 1800, about 10 million Africans were shipped to the Americas. 10 million people. To put that in context, if you were to take everybody in Idaho 5 times you still would not have enough to calculate all the Africans that were put into slavery. I hope that helps you see the sheer number of people that were being transported for slavery. So this would have been a normal slave ship here. And you kind of can see these pictures here and what they look like. And these black images are African black slaves being lined up on the ship. And you can see the outlines of their person. And you can see that they're literally being carried like you would see, I think, even cattle. In fact, I know that cattle and pigs have even more room in trailers that are being transporting livestock. This is how Africans were loaded. And they were chained to the boat. So you can't move. And hopefully somebody responds quickly enough to, if you have to go to the restroom or if you have to throw up, because you are on the sea. Many people get seasick. And you're on it for a long time. Hopefully somebody can get you moved fast. Because if they don't, people near you are going to be not so happy, because they're going to have to be the ones sitting in human feces, in urine, in vomit. And it's absolutely a travesty. It's a horrible, horrible thing, right? And so they call this the coffin position below the deck. Because sometimes people would literally die in place, and then everybody else would be sitting there next to a dead body. What would they do with the dead bodies? They would throw them overboard. And it is said from some of the oral histories that literally sharks followed the slave ships because they could eat the entire way. And so we're going to see that Spain is going to establish a new empire. This is going to be called New Spain. They're going to come down into Peru. And here this yellow represents Portugal. The English will try to get themselves early on in these areas as well. They'll be mostly focused, though, up in the northeast, which we're familiar with, right? And will be later. The English really don't get a very firm settlement until the early 1600s, where the Spanish have been doing it for over 100 years prior to that. Because of this, new people mixing together, you're going to start having new groups of people form. Okay, so let's take a look at the different groups and how they form. So that way we can understand a little bit more exactly what these groups are and what they are not. So first off, you have Native Americans and you have black slaves. From the Native American line, you're going to have, when the Spanish and Native Americans have children together, you're going to have mestizos. A vast majority of Mexicans today are mestizo, meaning they are a mixture of Spanish and Native Americans. So every Mexican today is European and Native American split. Now, you might have people who are indigenous to Mexico who are not Spanish, and they would be just Native American then. Or you might have Spanish who live here but have not had any relations with any Native American, and they would just be Spanish. So it's important to see that this mixture creates a whole new culture that we recognize today. On the other side of that, if you had a African American and an Englishman, a Spaniard, or a Englishmen, and they had children, much like Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, they would have children and they would be called mulatto. Mulatto is a mixture of European and African American. Okay, and then you'll have other groups as well. So you'll have the word peninsulars, and peninsular is somebody that was Spaniard born in Spain, but they're residing in the New World. Okay, so it's somebody that's here in the New World, but they are actually themselves completely Spanish. Now, a mulatto would have been an African American um, and an African American and a European mixed. A Kroll, the difference between that and a mulatto is somebody that is from the Caribbean area that's intermixed with Europeans, and so there's going to be a difference between that. So this is where we're going to see more like Haitian people coming from, because they won't necessarily be completely African, but there'll be a mixture. And so we start seeing these different classes of people. And today we have lots of different people from all different types and backgrounds. Unfortunately, we haven't always seen the assimilation or the cultures be able to survive these things. Like I said, after the conquistadors came and conquered the area, missionaries would be sent out, and specifically in the Catholic Church, it would be Jesuits. Jesuits was an order, means the Society of Jesus, and their whole mission was to bring people into the Catholic Church. It was founded by a man named Saint Ignatius Loyola, and he would go out, and the priests would, and they would do missionary work. And they were trying to oppose the Reformation that was going on in Europe. Reformation being the Lutherans, the Methodists, all those new religions coming up. They were trying to oppose that and get more Catholic followers, and they were very successful in Central and South America. And we can see the influence of these missionaries all over Central and South America, from Guadalajara Cathedral to Our Lady of Guadalupe, to all sorts of Spanish missions that were all over that area. So let's talk about some of the impacts of the European expansion then. Native populations were ravaged by disease because of this. So one of those negative things from the Columbian Exchange is that 95% of Native Americans will die. And again, not by sword, not by gun, but by disease. The other thing, and this is kind of ironic, is that as the Spanish were trying to get more and more gold and wealth, they actually really hurt their economy. Now, you might say, how can you hurt your economy if you get more gold and silver? Well, really, because they got so much gold and so much silver, it created inflation. And remember, inflation, if you haven't gotten there yet in economics or don't know what that means, it means that literally there's so much money that the value of money goes down, right? Something's worth something because it is rare. Gold is worth a lot because it's rare, but if everybody has gold, it's not really worth as much anymore, is it? And so it creates inflation, which means that prices go up. Everybody has so much gold and silver now at this point that basically people who are selling actual goods start to make their prices go up because they feel like they're not getting the amount of money that they really need. This is going to create a price revolution. And this is going to have a lot more products being sold all over Europe. We talked a lot about the different ones being transported back and forth, and it's going to create a whole new market for people to be buying things. But it's also going to deepen colonial rivalry. Spain and Portugal will continue to hate each other, will continue to fight, and eventually we'll get some other players like France and England who are also going to be trying to fight to become the most powerful empire in the world. And so this is the end of our notes here. Let's make sure that we've answered our objectives and that we've got them very clearly marked in our notebooks. Okay, so what countries were the earliest imperialists? It's easy. It's Portugal and Spain, right? Hopefully that was very clear to you. Portugal and Spain are the two earliest that we're going to be talking about. What made countries seek other nations? Really, I think mercantilism, looking for those new resources, right? And also trying to find a new way to get to China. And so I think those would probably be the most important ones. So number one, that they're trying to mercantilism, and number two, that they're trying to find an all-water route to China and to India. And what were some of the positives and negatives of the Columbian Exchange? Simply write down some of those positives and negatives. So some of the positives you could write down would be that new vegetables and other types of food were traded. So that's a positive. Technology was shown. Guns were traded. That could be a positive or a negative, I suppose. Livestock, positive. Some negatives, disease, right? We talked about that. Whooping cough, the measles, malaria, smallpox, killing 95% of all Native Americans. Those would all be negative things that you could easily put down. And so this is the end of section 1, and hopefully everything was very clear to you. If not, let's make sure we discuss it in class, and hopefully you were able to pick everything out.